Beyond the single image, Spanish photography from the Foto Colectania Collection in Barcelona, it's a good chance to get to know one of the most important photography collections in the Iberian Peninsula, bringing together the history of photography both in Spain and Portugal. The collection started out in the year 2002 and has acquired around 3,000 photographs, plus the entire archive of photographer Paco Gomez, a massive archive of architecture photography. So this is one of the most representative collections of Spanish photography since 1950s, in the mid-20th century, up until the present. In fact, the collection is well known for preserving extended blocks of works from each of the photographers. When I was invited to curate this exhibition, I actually went through a crisis since I didn't know how to summarize this history. What I soon realized is the fact that within this collection, we encounter three generations of photographers: a first generation from the early 50s, 60s, and 70s, who went out on the streets and practiced what is often known as street photography, a form of practice that actually extracts images from the real, whereas the second generation of photographers, names like Colita, Pilar Aymerich, Manel Armengol, they behave like photojournalists and they cover dramatic political changes in Spain and Portugal when dictators like Franco and Salazar died and the society sort of all of a sudden went through a massive transformation implying collective energies, political demonstrations, and changes that photographers were eager to capture. Yet a third generation of photographers like Cristina de Middel, Laia Abril, Adriana López Sanfeliu, Javier Rivas, Chema Saldans, they have not changed much the aesthetics of photographies, yet what we see is that their attitude, it's completely different. Whereas the first generation regarded or witnessed the real, trying to capture those instants, those moments, this later generation understands that photography is a political device that allows them to collaborate, sympathize with collectives. So we go from capturing to collaborating along this history of photography. As I said, a double process of modernization and at the same time a complex history in which photography changed itself. So the most thrilling experience curating this exhibition was the fact that photographies would mean things very different depending on which other photographs sit next to them. Thus, having 150 photographs organized in 20 sequences and 10 blocks allows us to have horizontal relationships, horizontal connections, and also vertical connections in a way that the real apparatus, the real machine, the real device for photography is no longer the camera, but it is actually this set of relationships that constantly generates new meanings, new connections, and new images that were not literally produced.
Molt bona tarda a tothom, aquí des de la seu de Foto Colectania. Welcome everybody here at the Foto Colectania Foundation in the headquarters of this wonderful collection in Barcelona. Welcome everybody who's following online these events. It is mandatory to say that it's going to be recorded. This activity, this panel, and this first presentation by Joan Fontcuberta is an activity organized by Fundació Foto Colectania in order to expand, comment, and deal with an exhibition that is currently at the Margulies Collection at the warehouse in Miami. It is the exhibition that we have entitled Beyond the Single Image, which is actually, which will remain open at the warehouse in Miami up until April the 2nd. That exhibition, it is the first iteration of an original exhibition that we presented here in the space in the gallery of Foto Colectania Collection in Barcelona with 36 authors from the collection and representing Spanish photography and Portuguese photography. Foto Colectania, Fundación Foto Colectania, wishes to thank you, all institutions and partners who have supported this exhibition, both here and abroad in Miami. We want also to thank you and welcome Mr. Rollan and Mr. Margulies and Catherine Hintz, who are following the event online. We would like to announce also, with great pleasure, that beyond the single image, the image that is now on display in Miami will be very soon presented in the Centro Cultural de España in Mexico City. So this will be happening early in July up until October. We want also to remind you of the structure of this event, which will actually start with a presentation of Joan Fontcuberta, whom I will introduce very soon. This will take around 30 minutes, and then we will open up to the panel with the several participants that I will also introduce at the moment we start. So we will have a panel, and then by the end of the panel, the audiences will be invited also to make questions. A Q&A will be open online for those following through the screen of your computers to send your questions. So reminding that these 15 minutes, it's for the audience also to inquire, to comment, or to respond to any of the statements from the 5 invited people in the panel. And now it is also with great pleasure that I introduce Joan Fontcuberta, longtime friend, longtime contributor to Fundación Foto Colectania, present in the collection with remarkable works from the 80s. But he's not just a photographer, he's also a researcher, a writer, and a promoter who has been supporting an entire community of young photographers in this country, both organizing events and with his teaching activities. He started to be well known in the 80s with important series of works like Herbarium and Fauna, who launched his reputation internationally. But I would also like to claim his role, his contributions to the history of photography. In 2013, he was the Hasselblad awarded winner, acknowledging his enormous contribution to the field of photography. Just to mention one of his books, because he's a prolific writer, I would like to draw attention on a book that he entitled Pandora's Camera, which was edited by Mac in 2014. And for today, he will present a survey of the recent changes in the field of photography as we approach the bicentennial celebration of photography. So we will have to wonder whether we have to celebrate, whether we have to really inquire more properly this history. And because of that, he will actually take the IA as a sort of a starting point to reconsider these 200 years, and why not also the 25 years of the Foto Colectania Collection, which is also something properly to celebrate. Thank you very much, Joan, and I hand it over to you, and I will see you later with the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Carles. Bona tarda. Hi. I'm very pleased to be here and have the opportunity to open this session and be able to share some ideas regarding, as Carles said, the impressions I have about the last 25 years of photography. Carles' presentation was generous, dealing with the different aspects of my interest, but mainly I consider myself as a photographer, as a visual artist. This means that what I can interpret of reality or the history of photography is always subjective. So it's not intended to be a kind of academic, analytic, scientific interpretation, but just some notes about how I see this past quarter of the first century of the first quarter of the century and the first quarter of the millennium. It's true, we are going through struggling times. We don't know, let me start with my presentation. We don't know if we are going forward. We should see the picture. We are going forward the death of photography or the resurrection of photography. You are now seeing on the screen the installation of a Spanish artist called Ana Ferrer, presented in Vigo in 2019, in which, as you can see, hundreds of photographs are introduced into a coffin, but the other interpretation is that the same hundreds of pictures are leaving the coffin, so they are somehow returning into life. So this is the doubt. It's depending on the way you would like to consider the situation. As Carles said, we approach the bicentennial of the birth of photography, and in countries like France, they plan gigantic events to commemorate these 200 years of the first existing photographic image. To be precise, the believed to be the earliest surviving camera photograph that, as you might know, is the Niepce rudimentary print shot in 1826-27, it's not clear exactly, and which was recovered by German historian Helmut Harsheim in 1972, and which is currently in the holdings of the Harry Ransom Research Center of the University of Texas at Austin. In a more modest scale, we would like also to celebrate these 25 years of Foto Colectania Foundation, which is the institution which is inviting today to be here and discuss the future of photography. In this first quarter of the 21st century, photography has become an ubiquitous and essential medium for communications, art, and politics as well. Technological advances have multiplied creative possibilities, but have also generated new ethical and social challenges. The immediacy and overproduction of images have changed our relationship with photography, making it more accessible, but transforming many of the original parameters. I would like to go backwards and review these 25 years using the tools of other disciplines, for instance, demography. This is to propose a kind of demography of photographic images, and therefore taking into account the birth, the death, and the migrations of photographs, the birth of photographs, the death of photographs, and the migrations of photographs. You are now looking at the first Niepce picture as it's seen in regular standard lighting, but you do an effort, that's what you finally arrive to perceive, which is, as you know, the landscape from Niepce's studio in Le Grasse, his summer estate near Chalon-sur-Saône in France. This idea of migrations, or the transformation, the moving of photographs into new stages, brings us to the category, which I like very much, of post-photography. It's a concept which should be maybe discussed in deeper sense, but I would explain it in short words with some more or less seminal concepts. I'm presenting now an artwork by a German photographer, Andreas Müller-Pohle, who took the Niepce photograph and transformed into what he called digital score. Is this the same image by Niepce, but now transformed in the alphanumeric code of the same visual information? This is done in 1999. So it's almost 2 centuries from one image to its transformation. And this explains how new concepts, new technologies, new social, cultural, economic situations can lead us to understand images with new natures and new functions. Another example of this transformation in terms of, let's say, post-photographic conditions is the piece I did myself with the same origin. I took, in this case, the same Niepce photograph, the heliogravure, and using a specific photomosaic software connected to the Google and internet, I was typing the words photo and photo with PH and F, and letting the software refashion the original photograph, capturing all the images available in the internet in real time at the same moment, and reproducing the same image, but in this case, where the units, the graphic units of the picture were already existing images, photographic images, which relate to the massification of contemporary visual world. In this intimate texture, going through the entrails of the photographic print, I mean, going into the inside the skin of the photograph, you will realize that all the different categories of photographic history are displayed here. You can find, of course, art photography with well-known masterpieces. You can find advertising photography. You can find wedding. You can find portrait. You can find nude. You can find pornographic, industrial. All kinds of photographic uses have been collapsed here, conforming what is an homage to that first existing image. So again, maybe 2 centuries are separating these 2 kinds of pictures, but in one we see that will to depict reality, and here in this post-photographic stage, we see the need to unveil the true nature of the photographic image. What's post-photography? It can be defined with different means, but I would just answer that it's the migration of the foundational and ontological values of photography at its origin. Photography was one of the pillars of the Industrial Revolution, and also a heir of the rationalistic spirit of 18th century, and later the techno-scientific culture in 19th century. And the invention of photography is one of the cluster's innovation which fostered the dramatic expansion of modern transportation and communications, like the railway, the steamship, and the telegraph. All these three, together with photography, propitiate the revolution which led us to the progress of 19th and then 20th century. From an economic and political point of view, photography contributed to the control of the world by its symbolical appropriation. During those photographic surveys and scientific expeditions where a photographer set his tripod, later an army set the flag. So it was not an innocent medium. It was a kind of authoritarian and possessive, with some violence inherited from its inception. From a social and cultural perspective, the camera acted as an instrument of benediction and as a way of facilitating the visual encyclopedization of knowledge. And third, from a spiritual and religious perspective, photography transcended finitude and death and aspired to magically supplant reality. Let me show a couple of funny pictures which explain how somehow photography has this totemic nature which allow us to understand that it's the presence in the absence. For instance, these are images of the so-called flat daddies or flat mummies. In 2006, during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the US Army sent to the families of soldiers deployed there with cutouts of real-size photographs of the soldiers. And in such a way, psychologists from the army believed that this could help to recover from the pain of the absence. So, of course, this sounds like a caricature, but it was something actually done with the North Dakota National Guard and the Maine National Guard. After some experiences, it seems that it didn't work really well, and families really wanted to have the real men or women and not just photographic representations. But only the idea that some psychologists believe that this was a therapeutic system to avoid the pain of the missing person, it's a proof that photography somehow embodies this kind of symbolical power. Another example of the same, during the confinement of COVID, a priest called Giuseppe Corbari, priest of the Robiano church near Milano, officiated the Mass in an empty church where the parishioners have been replaced by their portraits. Apparently, God was okay with that. I mean, that you cannot go to Mass because you must stay at home because of healthy reasons, but at least you sent your picture, and this picture is your ambassador, is representing you. It's a vicarian substitution of yourself. So let's go further. What are the trends of post-photography? The first one is the massification of pictures. I mean that, the fact that, the fact that we produce so many pictures that this changed the value and the status of photographs. This is, as you probably know, a famous installation by Eric Kessels, presented for the first time in Museum Foam in Amsterdam in 2011. And the title is quite explicit, Photography in Abundance. He was downloading all the photographs uploaded in Flickr for one day, and this was about 1 million pictures, and they were just displayed in a chaotic way in the gallery. And if you think that you could spend 1 second just watching in a glance a single photograph, you would require 1 week, full time, I mean 7 days, 24 hours per day to look at the whole amount of pictures. So that's a paradox. We don't do photographs to be seen sometimes. We have such a mass production that we don't have time to look at them. The second point I would like to focus is the rise of what we can call the Homo photographicus. After the Homo sapiens, we arrived to the Homo photographicus. This means someone holding a camera and using it in all directions all the time. Another example, which is quite a good illustration, we have on the bottom, there are 2 photos with a similar perspective in St. Peter's Square in Rome of a crowd waiting for the announcement of the election of a new pope. Above, in 2005, the proclamation of Benedictus XVI, and below, in 2013, for the proclamation of Francis I. The difference is obvious. There has been a metamorphosis. All the attendees have become Homo photographicus, and you see that they are not just standing up, waiting in a quiet attitude, but taking photographs. What are they photographing? Nobody knows. But using the camera is a gesture that sometimes overcomes the sense, the functions, the meaning of the photograph itself. Another interesting point of post-photography, the image dematerialization. I mean, the images lose the body but keep the soul. The image is losing the support. At the beginning, the photographic image was a piece of metal, a daguerreotype, then it was glass, then it was cardboard, then paper, then film, and finally nothing. Finally, the image is losing its materiality. It is not an object any longer. It's living on the screen, in my computer, on cell phones, everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And of course, this means that we lose that presence, we lose that totemic force, but at the other side, we are able to make pictures circulate in an accelerated way. Another aspect, photo sharing and photography becoming a language. At the beginning, photography was a kind of calligraphy, was a writing, a light writing, but now it's a language. We talk photographs. We use photographs to communicate. It's not only to depict reality, it's not only to witness the world and provide evidence, but to use it as a communication form. And another one, the last one, hypervisibility. Now there are so many cameras photographing at the same time. There are so satellites, there are so CCTV cameras on the public spaces that everything is recorded. It's like the God eye watching everything, and nothing can be away from this kind of global perception. And these trends could be summarized in what we can consider technological factors, social and cultural, political, artistic, and communication. Regarding technological factors, I think that one of the main points have been the total digitalization. Analog photography has been largely relegated to artistic or nostalgic domains, while digital has achieved total hegemony, facilitating image editing and distribution. Another point, the expansion of smartphones. The smartphones have placed high-quality cameras in the hands of millions, making photography more accessible and immediate. At the beginning, we had cell phones which allow us to take photographs. Now we have cameras which allow us to talk. another point, computational photography. Sophisticated algorithms allow for higher quality images, even with small sensors, improving sharpness, brightness, and other qualities. And finally, of course, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, AI, has revolutionized photography with automatic image enhancement, facial recognition, digital manipulation, and the creation of synthetic photos. Of course, this is having an application to science. For instance, this is the image created in a synthetic way of the first black hole depicted as image recording. And this was achieved with the called Event Horizon Telescope, which coordinated 12 high-power radio telescopes around the globe to collapse their information and be able to transform that in a visual representation. Of course, a black hole is invisible, and this is a kind of paradox that this technology, artificial intelligence, is allowing to have how to figure out how a black hole could be represented. Or, for instance, this is an illustration at left of British botanist James Bateman from a book of orchids of Mexico and Guatemala, published in 1845, and at right is the transformation, the migration of this scientific illustration into a photograph. Maybe from the screen you are not able to check, to realize the details, but in a close examination, you would realize how the status of the image is migrated from the drawing illustration to a detailed, accurate photographic one. So now we have technologies facilitating this kind of possibilities. From a social and cultural factors, photography has been introduced in, as the main protagonist in the social media. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc. have turned photography into a fundamental tool for communication and identity construction. And the selfie culture has emerged. This kind of obsession for self-representation has changed the relationship of photography with ourselves, turning into a constant expression of a kind of digital narcissism. And this is really a kind of genre which has appeared, which is the result of this post-photographic condition. We have all these examples, and it's very funny here because we have a public figure, in this case, Hillary Clinton, and all her followers are not watching at her, are not looking at her, but they are giving her the back in order to take the selfie. And this is a kind of turn of the traditional way. Usually in the photographic times, we should photograph Hillary Clinton directly, but in this case, it's the opposite. I photograph myself, and behind there is Hillary Clinton. So I want to prove that I was there when she was delivering a speech. Or, for instance, the Pope, again, same, and then the first papal selfie, and how these images circulate in the internet, in social networks, and so on. And of course, this generates another phenomenon, which is overexposure, and then from overexposure we go to post-truth. The massive use of photography in digital media has raised concerns about misinformation, image manipulation, and the loss of photography's documentary value. Another important aspect here is related to copyright and privacy. The increase in digital photography has sparked legal debates about image ownership and their distribution without consent. I mean, we are changing paparazzi from the photographic times to hackerazzi in post-photographic times. Regarding political factors, we could deal with the power of images. I mean, images are more and more powerful in order to change people's opinion, to become important elements in propaganda and in the way public opinion is shaped. And more than ever, conflicts and wars are fought through a war of images. And just think what's happening right now in Ukraine or Gaza. But at the other side, social movements like Lives Matter, feminism, and climate change protest are using photography to document abuses, denounce injustices, and mobilize society. There's also problems regarding censorship and control. Governments and big corporations have imposed restrictions on image circulation in the name of security or morality affecting freedom of expression. This also is driving us in another problem, which is the crisis of photojournalism. Regarding artistic factors, I would like to mention the hybridization of photography with other disciplines, the return of analog photography as a reaction to technology and to obsession for technological perfection, even sometimes with a sense of environmental concern. I mean, we now realize that photography has been polluting, photography has been providing a lot of leftovers of toxic remains, and because of that, there are some artists, some photographers who return to old techniques, for instance, the antotype, which are images, photographic images, using the light-sensitive properties of plants. So not using chemistry, not polluting, not contaminating with the usual darkroom chemistry. No? These are, for instance, landscapes by French photographer Léa Aourdin. There's also another interesting point in these 25 years, which is the consolidation of photography in the art market and the collecting of photographic works. And another aspect interesting is the rise of the photo book as a specific format for photographic expression, which is complementary of the exhibition in galleries and museums. Together with the photographic book, we should also deal with the fact that many artists, many photographers now conceive their projects to be circulated through the internet or through online platforms, not necessarily onto solid physical supports. Regarding communication factors, photography is becoming a dominant form of communication, and this is allowing the emergence of new documentary narrative. With the crisis of traditional journalism, alternative visual essays are appearing that can even resort to fiction and other forms of storytelling that have been ideological, discarded until now. That's quite interesting how documentary, which has been ruled with a very ethic and let's say the ontological concerns, now is open its mind to accept other ways of storytelling. Another aspect interesting in these communication factors is the appearance of the citizen journalism and the democratization of information, but also the problem of manipulation and misinformation. This is the emergence of fake news. I would like to show this interesting advertising from the 1920s in Spain, when Spain embarked in colonial wars in northern Africa. It's, as you can read, it's an announcement for a Kodak camera, the Kodak West Pocket, and the idea is that the best gift for a boyfriend living for the front, for the war, is to give him a camera, and in such a way he will be able to depict, to photograph all the moments in which he is not involved in fighting and killing. And regarding fake news, it's been really a big issue in the recent times. There have been, exhibitions, books, essays, academic studies, and so on. But I think that this is something that we should deal with. We should be prepared, and this can also be cured with education, with visual education. In overall, all those circumstances bring us to what it's called the age of iconophagy, according Brazilian philosopher Norval Baitello Jr. This thinker, Baitello Jr., has drawn inspiration from one of the figures of avant-garde artist in the 30s in Brazil, Oswaldo de Andrade, and his concept of cultural anthropophagy, for which he stated life is poor, devouring, eating. But it's going farther and open the act of devouring to a theoretical desire to analyze visual culture. Devouring images and being devoured by them are simultaneously, not alternative options. We need to understand, he tells us, that the body is the site of the images, the receptacle, their main and most alive means. The body projects images into the world to populate it and to explain its existence. There are, according to Baitello Jr., 4 possible relationships between bodies and images. Bodies devour bodies, bodies devour images, images devour bodies, and images devour images. We are in this stage in which images, which is the pure iconophagy, is the situation in which images devour other images, referencing the way in which images overlap physically and symbolically and trigger the increasing acceleration of their circulation. If we think in the genealogy of images, in the migration of images, we will understand that all images, the images that we produce today, are in depth always of previous images. It's an endless sequence. So here we are. We face an uncertain future. At one hand, we don't know if we will witness the death of the resurrection of photography. And at the other hand, we should advance how images will respond to a new political order which seems to be regressive regarding the progress of civilization. In these convulsive times, marked by the authoritarianism and techno-fascist fantasies, which confront solidarity and democratic values, and which run against migration and hybridization, iconophagy bets on a process of ingestion and digestion of images and image worlds, from which to consolidate ways of accepting our protean and multicultural condition. This is our humanity. I would like to finish with a statement which is optimistic. I bet photography will flourish. Thank you.
Welcome again, all of you who are on the other side of the computer. And we are starting with the panel announced, in which we will have guest speakers, guest photographers like Cristina de Middel, Alec Soth, Adriana López Sanfeliu, and David Campany, who I will introduce later on. But first of all, I want to thank you, Joan Fontcuberta, for this great contribution. As I said before, I mean, I always picture Joan as someone who's not just contributing to the field of photography, but who is also helping to understand the evolution and the use value of this technique. So much that what Joan has been presented resembles very much a new regime, like a photo-capitalist regime, in which images, economies, and feelings are all blended together in a way that we have somehow also metabolized photography, and photography no longer needs of any technical dispositive. We are probably the technology in itself making possible images, photographs, so that these technologies ever more collapse and compress and closer to our bodies, as Joan was wonderfully describing and suggesting. So the intention of this panel, which internally we have announced with a very provocative and synthetic title, Icon, Nation, and Citizenship, it's to shed some light on the recent changes in photography, but also acknowledging the fact that photography in the last 75 years, which is the span of time that covers the Foto Colectania collection, has probably not changed much. And it looks pretty much the same. It looks like a practice in which, you know, photography always demands to be close to whatever event, whatever object it has to be represented. In a way that these 75 years of photographic practice represented throughout the photographers in the Foto Colectania collection is giving us a perfect platform to consider what are the proper dynamics of photography as it has to change, as it has to confront new social needs and not only strict aesthetic impulses. So for this reason, we have with us, as I said, Cristina de Middel, who is a photographer, who actually started out as a photojournalist, but in the year 2012, she self-published The Astronauts, a remarkable work in which she actually dismantled the traditional documentary approach, which often requires an empirical contact with the subject and the subject to be truthful, to be evident, to be self-evident. So what she proposed with that essay was a remarkable questioning of whether those events were real or not, and this uncertainty, as Ito Style would like to call it, became highly productive and highly critical of the tradition of the documentary photography. She is right now president of Magnum, and her most recent project was a journey to the center, presented in Arles Rencontre de Photographie recently, last summer, into this last summer. We also have with us online Adriana López Sanfeliu. She's a documentary photographer and filmmaker. She trained at the ICP in New York, and she's been working on long-term documentary photography essays, such as Life on the Block. Her first documentary film was Elliot Erwitt, Silence Sounds Good, which premiered in Arles and in New York. So both of them, Cristina de Middel and Adriana López Sanfeliu, they're photographers, authors, participating in the exhibition in Miami at the Margulies Collection warehouse in Miami. We also have with us Alec Soth. Alec Soth is also a well-known American photographer, member of Magnum Photographs, and he's largely represented by the Margulies Collection in Miami. That is one of the main reasons to invite him also to join this online discussion. His work is being very much characterized by large format photographs, which resemble what in the 80s and the 90s was called like tableau, a painting that, a photograph that resembles somehow with its anatomy, with its genres, the tradition of painting. And he's often been associated to the tradition of Walker Evans and Stephen Shore. He has published a number of books. The most recent one is Advice for Young Artists, published by Mac last year, but he became well known for works like Sleeping by the Mississippi, published by Stadel in 2004. Finally, David Campany, UK critic, art curator, writer, and an important person promoting and discussing the recent trends in photography, with a long list of publications as well. I would say that he's been able to disentangle the history of photography from the history of photography by walking along the lines of contemporary art, cinema, and photography in a way that the history of photography has been de-essentialized and contested by nearby practices, which is a very necessary approach. And he is now preparing a Walker Evans exhibition for Fundación MAPFRE, which we will be very lucky to see here in Barcelona next year, next January 2026. So with these presentations, I would like to start asking the first questions or proposing the first issues to be debated tonight. The first one is that idea of the notion of the icon. And why the icon? And it is because the icon is ever present in a collection like the Foto Colectania Foundation, in which photography from the 50s and 60s, even through the 70s, relied very much on single images to communicate. By contrast, the collection holds up long series of works, as we are seeing, for example, by Joan Fontcuberta and Pere Formiguera, the entire series of fauna was acquired, like many other photographers who have been incorporated with large sets of photographs representing not just one image, but representing a corpus, a body of work that better informs the practice of these photographers. With this idea in mind, I would like to propose the four panelists to reconsider what was good and what was bad with the icon, since the icon became such a popular form of photography circulation. Joan Fontcuberta himself has been insistently repeating that the circulation, the migration of images has become somehow a natural environment for image production and image reproduction. So the icon has something of reductive, in a sense that it sort of obliterates many more images that were produced next to that one. But at the same time, the icon has had the force, the power to make photography ever more public and ever more present and useful. So the first question is, how does the icon can be regarded nowadays that we are practicing photography with in an infinite number of images, producing like infinite number of captures, and so there is something of a quantitative debate here. Whether the history of photography should be represented with isolated image, or else shall we reconsider the history of photography and look back at those many images that at one point were, as I said, shadowed by one. So please, we will start offering you 4 or 5 minutes for each of the statements. We decided that David Campany will be the first to intervene, very much eager to listen what you have to say about these issues. Welcome, David.
You're on mute.
Good start.
Now, good. Now we hear you.
Thanks, Carles. And thanks also to Joe, and I always love hearing him talk because I seem to find myself slightly disagreeing with everything that he says. The icon, I tend to think of it in two different ways. One, in terms of art history, where it seems to have more of a legitimate currency because painters wanted to make exceptional single paintings. There are painters that make bodies of work, but that's slightly more of a 20th century thing. But trying to make an exceptional single painting is a big part of the history, particularly in the Western tradition anyway. And so there's a part of photographic art that inherits that, although interestingly, there are very few photographers who really want to go about making absolutely singular pictures. Most photographers want to make bodies of work, sets, suites, series, sequences, archives, counter archives, typologies, suitcases, clouds, swarms, whatever it may be. There aren't that many that go out of their way to make singular photographs that stand in no relation to any others at all. There are some. I've got a book of Jeff Wall's work in front of me here. I think the issue is different within the history of documentary, reportage, and photojournalism, because it seems quite clear that it was the media, the mass media themselves, that were invested in the idea of putting forward certain single images and celebrating them as somehow symbolic, if not descriptive, of certain situations or historical moments. And iconic photographs in documentary and photojournalism don't just happen. You know, they have to be, their reputations have to be built. So I've written a number of essays over the years, actually going back and doing that kind of media archaeology. Okay, well, what was the circumstance in which this image was made? Where did it first appear? Where did it second appear? At what point did it start to be extracted from the body of work or the situation and given this unbearable symbolic weight? I mean, most quote unquote symbolic, iconic photojournalistic images cannot possibly account for what they're supposed to symbolically stand in for. You know, if you say to anyone the words Vietnam War, certain images will come to mind, the famous 5 or 6 or 7 that the media themselves constantly regurgitate as the iconic images. But if you poke people a little bit further and say, okay, well, at what point in the Vietnam War was this made? What does it really show? What was that war about? It all collapses. So very often iconic photojournalistic images are there almost as sticking plasters over situations that they cannot possibly account for. So that's my long, short answer. I think it's different in art history than it is from documentary and photojournalism. Yes, Carles, I think you're right that museums, when they first started acquiring photographs, did it along the lines of art historical connoisseurship, and they picked out singular pictures. I do think there has been a substantial shift in the collecting institutions towards bodies of work and away from trying to extract and venerate single pictures. I don't know that the art market has followed that. The art market still likes the single picture for obvious commodified reasons. But I think also, as Joan pointed out, the kind of renaissance of the photo book, which preeminently presents, bodies of work rather than single images, has been partly a kind of anti-iconic desire somehow. That's what I have to say on that matter.
Thank you for such a succinct description of how iconic images work and have worked throughout recent history. This is the issue, this is the question. And since we are speaking from the collection, from the place of this collection, this is our situated perspective in today's debate. Cristina, you have been well acknowledged also for questioning documentary practices and upsetting these actual historical correspondence between images, truth, evidence, etc. So what do you have to say about the use of the iconic?
Well, I think David has made like a very comprehensive, presentation of, the main aspects of the question and how it has evolved, and the differences, of course, between documentary photography, especially photojournalism and other disciplines. For me, I think the question that raises for me is how do you, because we talk about icons and we talk about Vietnam. Vietnam was 80 years ago. What are the contemporary icons? How do you create an icon now? Are the photographers aware that they are creating an icon, just as a painter might be aware that they're creating their masterpiece? Is there a moment where you click and you say like, wow, this is a picture, even if you haven't finished the project, even if, because I feel there is something sometimes, and maybe Alec, you can hopefully confirm with me, like when you take one picture, you see like, this one, I think this one is, for some reason, maybe we don't agree. But I would ask these questions and also maybe put on the table the fact that the icons might disappear or remain as something of the past. With the amount of images that we are dealing with, the icons last 24 hours. Even, images that can be so significant historically and iconographically, like, for example, the attempt murder of Donald Trump. Like, if you ask me today, what is the composition of that image? Who is in the picture? I know it's an important image, and I was, looking at it for maybe 7 days non-stop, but now I don't remember exactly what that image is. So I think the icons have a much shorter life, the more images there are and the more images we produce. And they are not necessarily linked with the media, of course, and the way we have to distribute images now plays an important role.
That's a very good point, Cristina, indeed. That's a very good point. By all means, the icon does not last longer than, as it used to be the case. So icons are much quicker consumed and evaporated and replaced by other icons. I would like, thank you. Adriana, you have been also working along the lines of a documentary practice also with a community that's in Spain, at least, has been over-stigmatized at the Gypsy community. So how have you dealt with this ever-present temptation to iconize, to produce those images which are regarded at the end of a process as iconic? And please tell us, is it really possible to say that this is an image that it's going to be iconic when you are in the process of making it? And I will beg you to be as concise as possible, because we'll try to have all positions stated before we go on to the next question.
Definitely the gypsy culture that I've documented for several years, and it's displayed here in the Beyond the Single Image. It's been an iconized subject, and how to go about not underlining the preconceived idea for me would be emphasizing on the practice of long-term collaborative social documentary. And what I mean by that is dedicating enough time to gain an access that allows intimate spaces to be shared, to exchange, and to create real connections, to portray beyond that single image and beyond that icon, and deconstruct those stereotypes and enable a deeper approximation to the gypsy culture. What's interesting would be for me to think, and for us all together, like if icons are falling, what would be, where do we share those series? Where can we find a way to display, like David spoke about books, the proliferation of photo books, and Foto Colectania is also an example of collecting series, bodies of work that enable us to authors to put in context our projects. And I think it's important to find other ways, other outlets to be able to give the space to larger bodies of work, and not just one or two images to talk about complex concepts.
This is definitely a handicap for, let's say, analogical photography or more traditional photographic practice, which is obliged to present rather reduced numbers of images vis-a-vis a digital practice, which allows for an infinite number of flows of images, not just a definite number. Thank you, Adriana. And I want to tell people who are on the other side of the screen, Adriana is speaking right from the warehouse, the Margulies Collection at the warehouse in Miami. And in the background, she has some of the photographs which are still on display in the exhibition up until April 2nd. And now I'll hand it over to Alec Soth. Thank you, Alex.
Hi. Thank you. Whenever I think about this issue of the icon, I think about when I first joined Magnum Photos and the photographer Dennis Stock, who's probably most famous for his pictures of James Dean. There's actually multiple iconic pictures of him, but the most iconic is the one in Times Square. I have a book. I have a book of all the James Dean pictures here, but it's that one, in case you're wondering. He sat me down and he said, Alec, like in Magnum, we're in the business of iconic pictures. And I was, appalled. I thought, we're a bunch of authors. That's how I define us, so on. But as time went on, I realized he's right in terms of the business, because the commerce of photography is largely built on the circulation of images, which is the iconization of photographs. And it's sort of inevitable. And it's not unlike, pop music. It's built on the hit. And you can have the body of work, you can have the album, and so many of us care about the photo book or what have you. But it's circulated in the press or what have you by the singular picture usually. I mean, even this very exhibition that we're talking about, I learned about it going online and seeing a few pictures. And of course, one can dig further. So I think it's inevitable. I don't think they're going to disappear, but I think Cristina brings up a great point about the shortened life of iconic images. But you think about memes and there's multiple forms of iconic imagery that continue to circulate. Um, yeah, so for me, it's really about accepting it, uh, and and then using it as a tool to lead people, hopefully, to a deeper investigation.
Right, Alec. Thank you for also for your very kind of hands-on response to the politics of the iconic, because I really believe that if there is any problem with the iconic, is that it represents or it embodies a very particular politics for the circulation of images. Sometimes seems more durable, sometimes seems of a shorter span, sometimes seems more powerful and ever reaching every corner, and sometimes is reduced to a small number of people. So when we prepared this discussion, the second term we threw on the table to continue at the same time the description and the evaluation of these collections so far gathered in Foto Colectania, which is a collection narrowed down to represent Spanish and Portuguese photography. And of course, this second term, this second keyword is nation. Of course, it's an old-fashioned term, but for photography, it's been absolutely relevant. And we are aware that nation, it is a term, again, refer to the history of painting, because painting was classified by genres and nationalities, but photography is being rather transnational and of a migrating nature. So I would like you now to confront this historical link between photography and nation. And guess what, Alec? Since you have been dealing with these large projects representing citizens here and there over a vast geographical area, I would love you to take over this, this second term, this second keyword, which is the nation. So please
Sure.
feel comfortable to start responding. How do you feel to this term in relationship to photographic practice, to your own photographic practice? And whether it is still a valuable term to evaluate photographic practice?
Well, whether or not it's valuable, I think, much like the icon, it's inevitable. So, I think there's an idea out there that photography is 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 a universal language, and in some ways it is. But I always think it has different dialects, and sometimes you can only understand those dialects so well. Um, and I'm aware that I have a very American dialect. So I come from a certain tradition of photography. Um, and the truth is, being an American and being educated in the way many of us are educated, it's very American centric. Um, but at a certain point, my understanding evolved, and I also had the opportunity to share my work in other contexts and other cultures. And that's what gets really interesting is that's where you learn that you're speaking a dialect. So I always remember this moment where I gave a talk in Tokyo, and I was showing Sleeping by the Mississippi, and we just like everything is taken for granted, and you realize this when you're talking to a certain audience, but that the understanding of the Mississippi River has one meaning if you live in the U.S. It probably means something else outside of it. And I showed a slide of this picture I took of Johnny Cash's boyhood home, and the interpreter asked me directly, "Who is Johnny Cash?" And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I have to explain this and and then, but you can see it in the details of Johnny Cash's house, the way the kind of material it's made with. I have an understanding of that that's going to be different than someone in Japan. Um, so so national understanding is sort of built into picture making. I think it's clearly is changing as borders become more fluid with the internet and the ease of travel and so forth, but it's still inevitable. It's the funny thing is with my own work, it's not my goal. It's never been my goal to document America or what have you, but I realize that it's going to be understood that way and more or less okay with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have the impression when I look at your work that you're representing a loose community, but whether you like it or not, this loose community is very much captured by a national identity at the end of the day. So please, Adriana, would you like to go on and also refer to this notion, which indeed it seems very old-fashioned, but at least in the context of the Foto Colectania Collection, it has a very particular use value because it represents its tradition, it represents the repetition of certain topics and how events are photographed over and over by a number of photographers. I'm thinking, for example, of Cristina García Rodero photographing the same celebrations that maybe Ricard Terré or others photograph. So how do you feel yourself relating to this term when you have been going back to this gypsy community for over 20 years?
Well, what it feels is that yes, you can stay in the iconic image and simplify the whole speech of and the whole transmission of a culture, and or not. And I did choose not to. That's why I dedicated this amount of time and to produce images within this community that I would say lives, in the margins of our society. So it is, in a way, a nation within a nation, because there are gypsies in a majority non-gypsy society, and at the same time, as my work focuses on the role of women in these clans in a Spanish traditional gypsy family, it's as well a nation within a nation, looking into the women role in a male-dominant culture. So the concept of nation, it's macro and it's micro, in subjective, depending on how you're, exploring it and communicating it. And so I think it's been interesting to. I was thinking about what Alec was talking about, the understanding of an image or assuming something. So with gypsies, there's been clearly a preconceived idea of who they are, their laws, their cultures, their tradition. For me, there's an anecdote I would like to share, which was the day I really gained access into this family. It happened through a ritual that at the time I personally didn't completely understand. My father drove me to the shanty camp where this family were living, and I was visiting them every X amount of months for a couple of years, but only staying for one day. And I decided that to really enter and access their culture, I had to spend the night. So by chance, my father drove me there, and I asked the community if I could sleep over. And the patriarch came out, put his hat over my father's head, shake his hand, and say, "Your daughter is welcome into our lives." And that's lasted now. This patriarch is passed, but this is 25 years later, and I'm still sort of adopted into this family. So it's interesting also for me at that moment, I didn't quite understand that ritual as that permission that was given from a patriarch to a patriarch, because I come from a different background. But for them, it was symbolically, clearly a way to state and define our relationship.
Thank
so
you,
it's always
Adriana. Thank you. It is indeed true that photography has the capacity to generate territories within territories and generate networks. And this is what we're actually witnessing nowadays, you know, how images connect people and somehow weave different communities. So if we propose the term nation knowingly and being aware that it is very old-fashioned, it's because somehow it is still attached to the history of photography. So we will have to discuss whether this is a term we have to actively remove or we will gladly accept. Cristina, I would like you to respond to this question, and why not refer to your experience with your recent work dealing with citizens who are actually migrating. So how a nation can survive in a world that migration is almost the rule for a large number of people. We cannot hear you. Can you activate the sound? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I think there is this idea, because I mean, I was talking about my last project is about migration, but I am myself a migrant. I'm not talking about migration in my own country. So I am, you know, like there's two layers of not being national in the country where the pictures are taken. And I think in terms of that, one of the maybe the most sensitive points, or one of the things that I was more careful about is to tackle the subject, talk about migration in Mexico, being Spanish, and we do have a history in Mexico. They always ask us to return the gold. So I need to be careful and see how I can add something to the debate in Mexico, knowing that I am Spanish. So I think this was complicated, staying neutral, trying to play with stereotypes, which is what I do with my work without being offensive and so on. And it made me think a lot. And of course, I think being national, so having, for example, Tupinamba, taking pictures of the Tupinamba nation in the Amazonia or wherever in Brazil is considered an added value, because it will get closer to truth, or what we understand photography carries of truth. And it's been like that, and there's been like a rebirth of this added value of the national as something that is, you know, that makes a picture better. I agree, but I think we shouldn't stop there. I think that besides truth, there's also opinion. And we could not only live with truth, we also need opinion. And in order to put in context that truth. And I think, for example, of works like Kudelka, who's photographed also the gypsies for ages. I remember like last year, I received from a Spanish, from Cordoba or from Huelva Photographic Association, a picture of Kudelka riding a horse in El Rocío. And he was also photographing Spain, you know, so I think you build the idea or the image of a territory or a nation, both with a dialogue between the people who occupy this territory and the people who visit this territory. And I think that's important. And it's not always the case in the public debates. And I've suffered that a little bit. So every time you give me the chance, I will remind it.
So nation is something we embody whether we like it or not. David, do you think that we are going to throw to the dustbin this term, or will it have any future value when we deal with photography at large, you working across different scenes, different countries, different institutions, and also different disciplines, as I suggested in your introduction?
Oh gosh, there's a lot just in that question. Well, first of all, there are all nations have their origins in violence, right? No happy people invent nations. There's always conflict. The conflict is double. The conflict is between an inside and an outside, and the conflict is always inside over the identity of what that nation is, right? We've got a strange moment in the USA where both of these things are happening at the same time in a very intensified way. Clearly, a very nasty struggle over what counts as American or not, North American or not, plus a redefinition of international relations. But that's just an exaggeration of what is there in nationhood. The genesis, the founding of any nation is in violence and conflict. And this is why, for example, the history of let's say Pan-African movements from the 50s and the 60s onwards are so interesting, because clearly a certain colonial version of nationhood was placed upon the continent. Not that there weren't such things as countries in Africa, but nations in Africa. But the way in which they get kind of fortified is inseparable from a kind of colonialism and nationhood is so bound together. Whenever I book an airline ticket, and you get that scroll where you have to choose what your nationality is. If you're from where I am, you never know where it's going to appear. It might be Great Britain, it might be England, it might be Britain, it might be British Isles, it might be United Kingdom. We don't even know most of the time. And it's a complicated one. At the same time, when a nation has suffered violence or erasure, as might well happen very, very soon, then the role of photography becomes very, very interesting. I mean, I think the exemplary case here is the project that Susan Mycelis facilitated around trying to re-establish some kind of national archive of Kurdistan. There is a quote unquote Kurdish people. Kurdistan as a nation was kind of dismantled by the so-called victorious powers after the First World War, persecuted from various sides. The National Archive was either destroyed or distributed. And so there's a very interesting project in the 90s where Susan Mycelis pretty much puts down her camera and becomes a facilitator of a reconstruction of a national Kurdish archive. And the interesting thing is that it takes place as a website, which is infinitely expandable, very early one in the 90s, a traveling exhibition and a book. So, wall page screen. So she's kind of mobilizing, all of those different valences of photography that Joan Fontcuberta was talking about there. So it's a complicated.
No, I'm glad you brought to attention this project by Susan Mycelis from 1991, when she actually undertook the task to register the effects of the Anfal campaign. And then, even though she watched the unearthing of the bodies by all the experts trying to dig out all the massacre that was of the massacred population, she resorted to the idea of the archive as a way of constituting an identity for the Kurdish people. And what really interests me in that project is the fact that she decided that the Kurdish people would exist as long as photography existed. So history of photography was in parallel with the history of the Kurdish people, whether they are acknowledged, recognized as a nation or not. That's why I think that the term nation still has a strong potential to give a recognition to people. And here we are entering into the third circle of this discussion when I propose to delve with the term citizenship. You already know in advance, but the audience probably don't. If I propose citizenship, it's because Adriana belongs to somehow a third generation of photographers in the Foto Colectania collection, which have very much understood that photography is being transformed into a collaborative act, not just stealing images from the flow of events on the street. But there is a second generation of photographers from the 70s, like Manel Armengol, Colita, Pilar Aymeric, who actually had to witness the political transformations after the death of Franco and the advent of a new democracy. Then photography turned out to be somehow photojournalistic, but that would be way too simplistic to describe it. So I would prefer to say that it is the moment when photography understood that they had to collaborate with citizens in order to establish a new political regime. That's why the term citizenship, it's the term I have proposed to you, panelists, to delve with in this last sort of round. So, David, I would like you to take it to continue elaborating on this, if you like, please.
Sure. I mean, I think of citizenship, or the citizen as opposed to the denizen. I think of citizenship in terms of, in legal terms, having certain papers that is then bound up with nationhood. I was thinking back to what was going on culturally during the first year of the pandemic. I mean, we're pretty much at the 5-year anniversary. What's the date today? Let me just check. Yeah, okay. So it was March 13th, 5 years ago, that New York pretty much closed down. And the only kind of cultural kind of communality seemed to be online, which I thought was interesting just in terms of nationhood and citizenship. And in fact, we, ICP, where I am sitting now, International Centre for Photography, we launched a hashtag which allowed people all over the world that followed us on social media to make images of what was going on in their lives, you know, in those kind of awful and uncertain times. And that hashtag became an exhibition at ICP and eventually became a book. I have a copy of it here. It's called ICP Concerned, Global Images for Global Crisis. Interestingly, just going back to and it was kind of transnational, but interestingly, the publisher said, David, can you choose the one iconic picture from the 820 images from the 71 countries? And I absolutely refused. And in fact, if I take off the belly band, the cover of the book has everybody's name on it. Mm-hmm. A sort of anti-iconic book. If I do hold up the belly band, you can see what it looked like in the
Great
exhibition space. Although interestingly, we did ask people when they were sending in their images to tell us, along with the caption information, where they were from, which country they were from. So there was kind of nationhood involved. But another way of thinking about this is the only photograph I can think of that has the word citizen in its title, this is just off the top of my head, I'm not saying there aren't hundreds, is actually a picture by Jeff Wall, which I happen to have on my desk, picture from 1996. It's just called Citizen, which is quite an interesting, provocative title. I remember asking him about this back then, so it's a kind of 30-year-old picture. And he said, well, you know, it's a figure lying on the ground in public and you have to feel kind of safe to lie on the ground in public. So that might mean that there are certain civic structures that allow this person to lay down and maybe go to sleep in a public space. Interesting idea that citizenship comes with or presumes certain kinds of civic protection. And of course, those are not extended to everyone, and they're not extended equally, even if you have your papers as a citizen.
Right.
I also love the fact that you can't actually tell, it doesn't say a citizen of where in particular, it's just about a sort of abstract idea of citizenship. And Jeff's probably photographed that in such a place where it could be any number of different geographic locations maybe not everywhere, but certainly it's a very non-specific sort of abstracted idea to maybe help a viewer think about just what a citizen is. And would being able to lay down on the ground be the kind of ultimate condition of the citizen, or is it someone who is able to protest using public space in a very, very different way? I can also imagine a picture of someone at a protest being called citizen.
Yeah.
Great,
David.
Anyway,
No, indeed, I mean, that is a notion which is at the stake in every photographic practice, and I would dare to say that we could probably imagine photography granting citizenship itself, not just from an administrative point of view.
I think citizenship is administrative.
Unfortunately, but I think we have a political potential. I mean, with photography, that's why I love to think that it is also granting this citizenship. And if not, refer to this wonderful work by Ariel Aiza Zulay, the civil contract of photography, in which she almost refashioned the invention of photography and transported it to a place of conflict in between Israel and Palestine, unfortunately very much alive nowadays. So at this point, I would like Adriana to take on, because she's been dealing with people whose citizenship is in question sometimes. I mean, the Gypsy community.
Yes, indeed. Gypsy community, and in this project that is on display here, have quite an uneven citizenship, a difficult position, living in the margins of our society, and always feeling that sense of separation. So when being approached by someone, in this case, me as a photographer, inquiring and wanting to access their culture and their sense of identity, what kind of tools or ways of approaching do I have to use, because I have a sense of entitlement, or I could seem to have, because I am more integrated in the society as we generally understand it, and not belong to those margins. So that position, which is, for me, a very delicate position when you photograph this kind of communities, as well as what I did with the Puerto Rican community in New York, is like positioning yourself with empathy, but without paternalism. So how do you approach in a manner that they feel that the dialogue is equal, and that and so that you have to accept a certain dispositives, a certain codes that are created between the subject and the photographer. So it takes time, and it takes a decision and a commitment from the person approaching the subject, and in this case, these particular subjects, these marginal communities, to do it in a manner that they will feel included and feeling, and it's thanks to their generosity to want to participate in the dialogue and to be accessed, that we are able to create images. Otherwise, we will just be recreating the stereotype that we all already know and all have in our minds about who these people are, how they live, what are their cultures or their laws. So,
Indeed, Adriana, this is a huge task for photography to avoid commonplaces. But Cristina, as president of Magnum Photographs, Magnum agency, dealing with certain politics of image circulation, how do you approach this problem in terms of regarding photography as a wonderful tool who can acknowledge citizenship when citizenship is contested, in places where citizenship is contested?
I think, I mean, I approach the subject in the same way as a president of Magnum and as a normal person. So I think the problem is not specific to that. But I think when we talk about citizenship, it's a matter of regulation and rights. And there has been, speaking of the relation there is between citizenship and photography, there's been a lot of regulations to protect the people who are photographed and the behavior of photographers. And there's a big deal of debate around the entitlements of photographers when they take pictures of someone. And I think I like to think of the irony of how in maybe the 10 or last 20 years, we've been asking, society has been asking professional photographers to be more and more aware of image rights and you know, the limits of what they can do as professional photographers, what you can portray or not, because a citizen is protected. But at the same time, we've seen how citizen journalism has invaded all the possible outputs and platforms with absolutely no regulation, and where citizens are equally, you know, exposed and their rights are not protected. So
I totally agree, Cristina. I mean, we're thinking of photography as a liberating tool for citizenship, etc., but it can also turn into a harmful instrument somehow, and it can also fix identities of citizens in very precarious situations. We have the well-known case of Florence Owen Thompson, who happens to be the woman photographed by Dorothea Lange and fixed for the eternity as a poor woman, as a migrant woman. So photography can both enhance citizenship and can also sort of generate new injustices as time evolves and goes on. So Alec, how do you feel this problem? How do you experience this problem, if you ever experience it in connection with people you photograph in your different projects? Hi, Alec.
you're muted.
Alec, you're muted.
Yeah, I keep unmuting and then someone keeps muting me. Maybe I prefer to be muted for this conversation.
Okay, oh, don't tell me that.
No, I mean, it's interesting. So with these three themes that you proposed, this was the one that I struggled with the most, connecting it to photography. But this angle is an interesting one because I do think the word citizenship to me evokes responsibility. You know, it's voting or paying taxes and our social contracts. And I don't necessarily attach it to photography for myself because I'm more on the art side of the spectrum where I want to be more free of responsibility. But of course, there is some responsibility, such as to the subjects one photographs. And there has been an evolution in thinking for myself as well. Probably the most, closest thing to an iconic picture I've taken is this picture of the guy with the airplanes. And interestingly, I recently visited him for the first time since I took the picture. And I've heard, through the grapevine that there's been some discomfort on his end with the way that's all played out. which is, of course, connected to the circulation of images and the commerce attached to that. So I try to take those things into account, and I try to be better about that. But much like the creation of an icon, I didn't really answer Christina's question about like, can one create an icon or does one know? I think it's really out of my control. And so in terms of like being a good citizen as a photographer, I can do my best, but it's not entirely in my control.
Thank you. Thank you for such a honest rendering of about the experience of you know, generating photographs and considering whether these photographs will actually molest or somehow generate a burden for those people who were photographed. Again, as David did before, I would like to recall Susan Misala's eternal commitment to return to Nicaragua to meet with all the people that she photographed during the 1978-1979 period of insurgents and revolution, people who were photographed in the middle of a conflict, and she thought she would never see again. And then she, as you would probably know, she undertook to go back and meet every single individual that appeared in her photographs as part of a continuation of the photographic practice. Thank you for being so responsive to these kind of, you know, weird, eccentric notions here, but it proved to be quite productive. And now I would like to open the floor for all those of you who are here in the Foto Colectania Foundation in the gallery to pick the mic and ask your questions. And then after the questions are taken from here, we will go into the Q&A online.
Hi. Hello. Well, we've gathered all these questions, both from the space here at Colectania.
Elena speaking from Foto Colectania Collection.
Yes. And from the Zoom questions and answers, in order to make it possible for you to respond to all of them in the brief period of time we have for the questions and answers. So I'll just formulate them in the name of the people who are online and on site. Okay. The first question we have for all our panelists is, have we then lost the power to create images? What does it mean to create an image? If 200 people take a picture of the new Pope's announcement, are those 200 new images or only one?
So here's a practical question. David wants to answer right away. Great.
Well, the interesting thing is that has the way that question is formulated is uncanny in its similarity to something that Siegfried Kracauer wrote in 1927, essay on photography, 100 years ago. These questions are not new. And they're not ours. And the reason they come up 100 years ago is because that's the beginnings of what we now call the mass media, the sudden proliferation of the illustrated magazines, newspapers, that massification that Joan Fontcuberta was talking about earlier. All of those metaphors for massification, floods of images, bombardment by images, the takeover of images supplanting memory or civic understanding, they first appear in the 20s. And I think we like to think in our moment always that our problems are newer and more important and more profound than have been faced before in the history of photography. I'm not saying things are not different, but I think it's our responsibility to see this as a question with a history to it. It's not a 21st century matter. It's not a post-internet matter. It's not a post-AI matter. These questions are long-standing now. I'm not going to answer it. I'm just going to say it has a long history.
Great. Alec, Adriana, Cristina, anything to say about this?
The only thing I would say, the only thing I would say is that what's a little bit different right now is that photographs are being used as direct communication, almost like speech. But like when like people using words, people speaking shouldn't be threatening to literature, for example. Like they can be different things. And in the same way, like 500 people taking a picture of the new Pope or whatever, it's chatter that's out there. And that has a place, as does the singular icon has a place, as the in-depth investigation which is, a refined use of the photographic language. Like they can all coexist.
Mm-hmm. Good. Adriana.
I am. No, I totally agree with Alec. I mean, I think it's not like one thing or the other. I think all those images taken and public events or that concern to the concern us. So there's interest to receive that kind of imagery. It can be both the domestic smartphone photo done by 500 people, or that assigned photography and that picture edited by an expert editor and published in a legitimate outlet for communication. So we're gonna have to live with both of them, and then we will see. It's also like now up to the audience or the reader of images to decide what kind of information he receives. It's like to make a little bit of discernment. It's like now a responsibility from us citizens and audiences to choose like because we're so bombarded by content.
Cristina, do you have anything to say in this respect?
Just a small thing that we are very worried about the proliferation of images, and there we are like bombarded by images, and there's images everywhere, but we're also bombarded by noises and smells. And if you think like 5 centuries ago or 1,000 years ago, there was probably less smells and then less noises, and now there's the trillion more, and we're not worried about that. It's just we have to edit our reality because it's become too complex, and that's it. It's just another skill we'll develop. It doesn't absolutely worry me at all.
Personally, I do have an answer to this sort of riddle or question, and I would answer like Susan Bookmores when she said that the more images, the better, because then none of those images will be taken as the truthful one, So we'll have to struggle to consider every single image as one possible image of whatever event. So I think there's also a political principle behind these qualitative versus quantitative ideas. Anyhow, is there any other question? Elena?
Yes, we actually have lots of questions.
Okay.
Over 500 people online and plus people who are here, so it's been quite difficult to select. Okay, I'm going to continue. So the next question is, in a time where photography is increasingly shaped by AI, digital manipulation and ephemeral social media trends, how do you see the role of storytelling evolving in documentary and art photography? Do you think the truth in photography still matters? Or has the medium fully embraced fiction as a valid approach to reality?
Cristina, do you want to answer this?
I knew this one would come to me.
You knew it was for you.
Yeah, I knew. Okay, I think the link between truth and photography has already been destroyed. Like, I mean, it was never born together. What is now a threat is the link between reality and photography. You no longer need reality to make an image that looks like photographic. And that is really, really challenging, because from all the challenges and threats that photography and the medium has been facing since it was born, because it's been about to die at least 4 or 5 times with color, with digital, with all the technological revolutions. But I think what is going to happen basically is that a photograph being truth is no longer going to be an added value. The new generations will not associate truth with good anymore. It will be irrelevant. And that is going to create a very different society. Because, I mean, we already can see it, like it's not important anymore. It's less and less important. Truth is less and less important. And reality is less and less important. So it's really a new age where I think, and here I'm speaking as the president of Magnum, I think Magnum has a responsibility to preserve and to protect the images that do have a link with history, that do have a link with our social memory, and that's one of the many things we're doing.
Alec, as a member of Magnum, how do you feel about this?
You support it.
Can you bear this responsibility?
I have to ask my president. Yeah, so I mean, earlier I compared, photography to just people talking, and just as people can speak untruths or tweet untruths, it becomes more and more easy to photograph in a fictional or untrue way. It was plenty possible before. It was always possible. The way you angle a picture, you didn't have to Photoshop or do any of these things. So I think we're going to have our relationship with the medium is going to change, and we're going to have more and more of an understanding that it's not necessarily truthful. But within that context, I think there's a hunger for people for more likely truthful sources or something closer to the truth. And it's important to have those media streams that we have more faith in. And I think that's what Cristina is speaking to with something like Magnum. Yeah.
David, Adriana.
Well, photographs do not make truth claims. Truth claims are made on behalf of them. So as an image, broadly speaking, it's always been an image text thing. The testimony is not connected with indexicality or anything like that. It's someone vouching for, guaranteeing on behalf of the photograph that it stands in a particular relation to whatever it may be. That was Fox Talbot noticed this right at the beginning. But even before that, Charles Baudelaire, when he wrote The Painter of Modern Life, he was interested in an illustrator called Constantin Guise. This is before photography, really. Guise might be in the Crimean War, or he might be in a courtroom in Paris, and he'd be making sketches. And the testimony is not in the sketch, it's on behalf of it. I can well imagine a journalist of high principle using AI one day. I can't see why that would not be possible. It's not the photograph that ever guarantees itself. Guarantees are made on behalf of, and then they are cross-referenced, checked, and so forth. It's never the image itself. You can't drop a photograph down the chimney of a courtroom and expect it to convict someone. It doesn't happen like that.
Good point.
If you get a speeding ticket in your car and the police send you a little photograph that was taken by the camera, if you challenge it, if you go to the courts, someone on behalf of that machine has to stand in the courtroom guaranteeing the principles by which the machine works. It's not the machine that's going to convict you.
No, it's true that evidence is being completely dissolved and it follows different proceedings, many very heterogeneous proceedings.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's frustrating that always, whenever there's a new technological development in photography, we suddenly get a very golden idea about what it was before. And it's,
right.
I find it frustrating, and it needs a certain kind of vigilance, I think, to set the argument straight.
Thank you, David. Adriana, do you want to skip the question, or do you have something to say? Cannot hear you.
I'll
skip
skip
it?
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Elena, I think she's telling us the last of the questions, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, we'll just.
Okay, we'll go for the last question.
Sorry, we cannot deal with all of the questions, but I think this one is particularly relevant now. Okay, despite its richness, Spanish photography is still not widely known internationally. What steps do you think could help elevate its recognition? How can Spanish photography engage more with international institutions and platforms?
Mm-hmm. So, David, would you like to start with this?
I think Alec should reply to this one.
Alec, okay. It's up to you.
I mean, I work at the International Center of Photography, and our remit is very international. At the same time, institutions are not as international as that. They're always located somewhere. We do make an effort to be very international. We have exhibitions coming up here from photographers from Mexico, Chile, Ivory Coast, Japan. That's just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. I'm currently editing a book of the work of Ramon Massats. And the interesting question there about that work is that once his work got, it was a slightly forgotten figure, but once it got slightly rediscovered, it was attached to the idea of Spanishness, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But
actually, as we speak, the photographs behind me are from Ramon Massats, from the actual collection at Foto Colectania.
What interests me about Massats's work is, one, how it could play into and mobilize some idea of mid-century Spanishness. At the same time, that photography clearly has resonances with the kinds of images, observational images, that were being made pretty much all over the world at that time. So I think if I was to put some kind of spotlight on Massat's work, I'd be as interested in what resonates internationally as taking it on as an embodiment of Spanishness, so to speak.
So, excuse me.
It always makes me a bit uneasy.
Right. And why not difference and singularity in a larger international context?
Because I don't, I think it's a very rare thing, absolute cultural specificity. I mean, photography brings with it kind of resonance and commonality and parallels as much as it does what might be distinct to, a place and a particular culture. I mean, I say that just as someone who spends most of his time with photography, and that just seems how it is to me. Yes, there are.
Right, David. Yeah, no, it's all right. No, I would like to hand it over the word to the other panelists, because we are running out of time. But we're very much looking forward to that monograph. Believe me. So, Cristina.
I think how to make Spanish photography be more present in the international arena. I think it has to be much more present in the national arena first, and much more respected in the national arena first, and supported in the national arena first. There's many ways, and I think there's a very clear example that we could totally follow. That is the example of France, that has managed to seduce its population into believing that photography has a value and that it's worth collecting. There's many examples of that. This year, for example, I was with the Secretary of State of Culture, who was very proud because she asked me to be part of the jury of Premio Velázquez, that is like the big contemporary art award in Spain. And it's the first time that a photographer is part of the jury. So in many ways, we don't believe in Spain that photography has the same value of other artistic expressions. And that makes it very difficult to sell it abroad.
Okay, right. Alec, what is your take on this?
Oh my goodness.
You have the right to skip the question if you wish.
I pretty much want to. The only thing I'll say is that I was just thinking, as Cristina was talking about, just making an analogy, because I really can't speak to that issue, but I often think in U.S. terms, like we have our different states, and I'll travel to a state. I'll be in Texas. I'll say, who's one of your best known photographers in the history of photography, whatever. And there are certain places where there's no answer, and those are the places that have not supported the arts. I happen to be from a state that's historically supported the arts, and so there are a number of photographers from here. So it does, in fact, start locally often. Good answer, Cristina.
Adriana, you're going to be the last.
Yes.
So beware of the last words.
Please don't take them for the large final statement of this amazing panel. No, I'll totally agree with the intervention of Cristina and Alec. I mean, I think, especially Cristina, I think Spain is a country that has not put the arts on the forefront, taken the pride or and putting the mechanisms, the supports, the resources to enhance art and export it. So that's been the case for many artists in Spain, not just in photography, that they've been noticed when they've migrated or they've been exposed and recognized abroad. And that is a pity, but that speaks about us, about Spain as a nation or as a culture, or how do we perceive ourselves? And it goes for many other things. I mean, now we have gastronomy being highly exported, but it wasn't. And we always had an amazing gastronomy, amazing wines, amazing cheeses, but there's always been the French wines and the French cheese that has been largely known. So why? Let's think about this and let's change it.
Thank you. We will follow the example of the French cheese, as you suggested, Adriana. And I think that this is a perfect moment also to end up this wonderful conversation. And I want to thank you personally, all of the panelists, for being obedient and creative. You proved to be really brave responding these questions. But also on behalf of Foto Colectania Foundation, we say thank you to you and also to Joan Fontcuberta, who opened up this event and activity. But I don't want to finish without also saying thank you to the wonderful crew that has made it possible both in terms of organization in Foto Colectania Foundation and also technically. And to say the last word, long life to photography. It is my feeling that if we have all these problems with photography, it means we have a lot of work ahead. So good night, and also thank you to everybody else who was on the other side of the screens. Good night.
Thank you.